Ethan Montgomery's flight touched down at Austin Bergstrom International Airport just as the late afternoon sun dipped behind the skyline, painting the Texas sky in shades of gold and orange. He stepped off the plane, suitcase in hand, and took a deep breath, inhaling the familiar mix of warm air, distant traffic, and faint hints of cedarwood from the surrounding hills. After 2 years of grueling MBA studies at Stanford, he was finally home. Despite the pride swelling in his chest, there was a part of him that felt uneasy. Austin had changed in his absence, yet in many ways it remained the same, vivid, bustling, and alive, just as he remembered. But one thing was different now. Ethan was different. He wasn't the restless young man who had left for college. He had a plan, a vision, and above all, a determination to focus on himself before letting anyone else into his life. His driver, a courteous young man named Carlos, helped him load his luggage into the sleek black SUV waiting at the terminal. "Welcome home, Mr. Montgomery," Carlos said politely, glancing at Ethan with a mixture of respect and curiosity. "How was Stanford?" He gave a faint smile. "Intense, as always, but worth it. I've learned more than I expected, and I've decided exactly what I want next." He paused, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle on the horizon. "And it doesn't include any distractions." Carlos nodded but didn't press further, sensing that the young man had more on his mind than casual conversation could reach. "Understood, sir. We'll be home in about 20 minutes." As the car wound through the familiar streets of Westlake Hills, Ethan's thoughts drifted to his father, Richard Montgomery. Richard had built a fortune in renewable energy, pioneering solar and wind projects across Texas. His influence and wealth were undeniable, but so was the quiet sadness that seemed to cling to him since the death of Ethan's mother 5 years ago. Ethan had returned home determined to be independent, to make his mark without being tethered by family expectations. He knew his father would want something different, something more personal, more permanent, but he wasn't ready to indulge that side of Richard just yet. By the time the sleek black SUV rolled into the driveway of the Montgomery estate, the sky had deepened into a rich indigo. The mansion, sprawling and elegant, sat atop a gentle hill overlooking the city. Its tall windows reflected the last vestiges of sunlight, casting a warm glow across the meticulously landscaped gardens. Ethan stepped out and was immediately enveloped in the familiar scent of cedar and jasmine that seemed to linger around the estate like a comforting blanket. "Ethan!" a warm, commanding voice called from the grand entrance. Richard Montgomery, tall and imposing despite the lines beginning to etch his face, came down the steps, his cane tapping lightly on the marble floor. "My boy, you're home!" His face lit up with the unmistakable pride of a father greeting a son he hadn't seen for months. But beneath the pride, Ethan could sense the loneliness that had grown in Richard's heart, the unspoken fear that his son's independence might keep him at a distance forever. Ethan smiled and hugged his father, feeling the familiar weight of expectation settle around him. "It's good to be home, Dad. Really good," he said, trying to keep his tone light, though a flicker of unease ran through him.
Richard studied his son for a long moment, his eyes a mixture of pride and concern. "You've grown into quite the man, Ethan. Stanford suited you, I can see that. But tell me, have you thought about settling down?" His voice was casual, but there was an unmistakable edge to it, as if he had been waiting for this conversation for years. Ethan pulled back slightly, offering a polite but firm smile. "Dad, I've thought about a lot of things, but right now, I want to focus on my ventures. I want to make my mark on the world on my own terms. I'm not looking for a relationship." Richard sighed, shaking his head gently. "You always were stubborn," he said with a soft chuckle, masking the sting of disappointment. "Your mother would have laughed at you, you know. But she always believed in love. And I believe in you. But even the strongest men need someone by their side." Ethan glanced around the elegant foyer, taking in the polished marble floors, the carefully curated art on the walls, and the heavy oak furniture that had witnessed decades of Montgomery history. "I know, Dad, and I appreciate it. Really, I do. But this is something I have to figure out for myself. I need time and space." Richard's eyes softened, and he placed a firm hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Time and space are fine, but don't mistake independence for loneliness. You're brilliant, yes, but even brilliance needs warmth, even if you don't realize it." He gave a wistful smile, then gestured toward the staircase. "Come, I'll show you your old room. We've made a few changes, but it should feel familiar enough." As Ethan followed his father up the grand staircase, memories of childhood summers, holiday dinners, and late-night talks with his mother flooded back. For a moment, he allowed himself a pang of nostalgia, remembering a simpler time when the weight of responsibility was lighter, when life seemed endless and possibilities were infinite. But he quickly pushed those thoughts aside, reminding himself of his purpose. He was here to carve his own path, not to relive the past. Later that evening, as the two men settled into the dining room for a quiet dinner, the conversation inevitably circled back to the topic of companionship. Richard had prepared Ethan's favorite pecan pie, its sweet aroma filling the room. "I thought a little sweetness might help persuade you," Richard joked lightly, placing the pie in front of his son. "It worked on your mother, you know, and me too sometimes." Ethan chuckled, but his eyes were serious. "Dad, I appreciate the effort. Truly. But you know me. I don't need anything else right now. I have plans, big plans, and I don't want distractions." Richard reached across the table, covering Ethan's hand with his own. "Son, life is full of plans, but it's also full of surprises. Sometimes the best things come when you least expect them. You may think you're focused, but one day you might find that love isn't a distraction, it's the fuel you didn't know you needed." Ethan shook his head with a small smile, hiding the conflict brewing inside him. "I'll keep that in mind, Dad. For now, let's just enjoy dinner." As they ate, a comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the clink of cutlery and the occasional exchange about business ventures and local news. Yet, underneath the surface, both men were aware of the unspoken tension, Richard hoping to see his son embrace life beyond ambition, and Ethan determined to remain in control of his destiny. That evening marked not just a return to Austin, but the beginning of a delicate dance between family expectations and personal desires, a dance that would soon become far more complicated than either of them could anticipate. Ethan retired that night to his old bedroom, a room that somehow managed to feel both familiar and foreign. As he lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The city lights twinkled outside, and the hum of Austin's life reached him even here. He had returned to a city he loved, a home filled with memories, and a father who cared deeply for him. And yet, the path ahead was his to define. For the first time in a long time, Ethan Montgomery felt the weight of the future pressing down. But for now, he was ready. Ready to stay single, ready to focus, and ready to face whatever challenges Austin had in store.
The dining room at the Montgomery estate glowed under the soft light of the crystal chandelier, casting warm reflections on the polished oak table. The scent of roasted rosemary chicken mingled with the sweet aroma of pecan pie, creating a homey, almost intoxicating atmosphere. Richard Montgomery sat at the head of the table, his eyes gleaming with anticipation, as if he knew this dinner could change everything. Across from him, Ethan picked at his salad, polite but distant, his mind running through emails, stock updates, and plans for his ventures. Richard's gaze, however, remained unwavering. He had waited months for this night, determined to sway his son's stubborn heart. "Ethan," Richard began, his voice casual but with an undertone of mischief, "I've been thinking." He picked up the crystal serving dish and presented it with a flourish. "You know how much I love a good pecan pie, right?" Ethan raised an eyebrow, amused but skeptical. Yes, Dad, I know. You've mentioned it at least a dozen times over the years. Richard chuckled, leaning back in his chair. Well, what if I told you that this pie could persuade you to consider settling down, maybe even marriage? He winked, slicing a generous piece and placing it in front of Ethan. It's your favorite, and I baked it myself. Made with love, of course. Ethan blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the theatricality of his father's gesture. Are you serious, Dad? You think a slice of pie is going to make me marry someone? Richard leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his eyes twinkling. Not just anyone, Ethan. Someone perfect. Someone who could bring balance to your life, and maybe even to mine. His tone was playful, but there was a subtle edge of longing beneath the humor, a father's desperate hope that his son wouldn't choose isolation over connection. Ethan smiled faintly, picking up his fork. I appreciate the sentiment, Dad, really, but I'm focused on my ventures. Love, marriage, it's not on my agenda right now. Richard sighed dramatically, as if the very thought pained him. Always the practical one. I swear, you get your head from me, but your heart seems to be missing entirely. Haven't you ever wondered what it's like to share your life with someone who truly understands you? Ethan paused, considering his father's words. There was truth in them, of course. He had spent years buried in studies and business plans, avoiding distractions and emotional entanglements. But the idea of sharing his life, even for a moment, felt foreign and oddly intriguing. He looked at the pie, the golden brown crust glistening, and something inside him stirred. Dad, he said slowly, leaning back, what exactly are you proposing? That I just marry someone because you say so? Richard laughed, a warm, rich sound that filled the room. Oh no, Ethan, I'm not asking you to throw caution to the wind. I'm merely suggesting that perhaps there's someone out there who could make life a little sweeter than this pie. And if a slice of my baking helps you see the possibilities, he tapped the serving dish lightly, well, it can't hurt, can it? Ethan chuckled despite himself. The absurdity of the situation, the charm of his father's insistence, and the undeniable deliciousness of the pie combined to create a moment of unexpected levity. All right, Dad, he said finally, taking a small bite. The richness of the pecans, the buttery crust, and the delicate sweetness seemed to work some subtle magic. He swallowed and paused, thinking carefully before speaking. I suppose I could consider it. Just consider it, mind you. No promises beyond that. Richard's eyes widened, and he nearly choked on his water. Are you serious? Yes, Ethan replied, trying to suppress a smile at the incredulous look on his father's face. Consider it. I'm not saying yes. I'm not saying no. I'm merely entertaining the possibility. Richard leaned back, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. Ethan, my boy, that's more than I could have hoped for. You're willing to open your mind to the idea. That's half the battle won. Ethan rolled his eyes but couldn't hide the warmth rising in his chest at his father's joy. Dad, you do realize this is highly unusual, right? We're talking about marriage, not a business deal. Marriage is the most important venture of all, Ethan, Richard said, his tone serious now. You can have all the success in the world, but without someone to share it with, what does it truly mean? I want you to be happy, son, and I want someone to be there for me too. Loneliness is worse than failure. Ethan felt a flicker of guilt at his father's words. He had seen Richard's health decline slowly over the years. The diabetes, the long hours, the quiet evenings spent alone in the library or study. He knew his father's life had been built around work, much like his own ambitions, but the loneliness, that was something Ethan had never truly understood until now. I know, Dad, Ethan said softly, pushing the pie plate aside and leaning back in his chair. But you have to understand, I can't just leap into this because it's convenient or expected. If it's going to happen, it has to be the right person. And right now, I'm not sure I even know who that is. Richard nodded, his expression shifting to one of quiet acceptance, though his eyes still sparkled with hope. "Fair enough, Ethan. All I ask is that you keep your heart open, just a little. Even the most disciplined minds need some room for chance, for love, for surprises." Ethan smiled faintly, the weight of the conversation settling over him like a soft blanket. "I'll keep it in mind, Dad. But just so you know, if I ever do consider this seriously, it won't be because of dessert alone." Richard's grin widened, and he leaned back in his chair, satisfied. "Fair enough, my boy. Fair enough. But I have a feeling this is the start of something interesting. Perhaps even life-changing." For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a flicker of excitement mixed with apprehension. Returning home had been more than a physical journey. It had been a confrontation with his family, his past, and the expectations that came with being a Montgomery. As he cleared his plate and helped his father with the dishes, he realized that maybe, just maybe, there was a place in his carefully structured life for something unexpected, something sweeter than pecan pie and far more complicated, the possibility of love. And as the night wore on, the lights dimmed and the quiet hum of Austin's cityscape drifted to the open windows, Ethan Montgomery found himself at the threshold of a decision he hadn't yet made, but one that would shape the rest of his life, whether he knew it or not. Grace Miller maneuvered through the bustling streets just outside San Antonio, her laptop bag slung over one shoulder and a tote brimming with files in the other. The afternoon sun beat down on her, but she hardly noticed, her mind already racing through the list of tasks awaiting her at Montgomery Industries. Between her two jobs, supporting her mother and younger brother, and managing her own modest department, Grace's life left little room for rest. Yet, despite the exhaustion, she felt a quiet satisfaction in her routine. She was responsible, organized, and determined to make life a little easier for those she loved. Her phone buzzed with a new email alert just as she walked into the modest cafe where she often grabbed a quick lunch. It was from her mother, reminding her to pick up groceries on the way home. Grace sighed, letting herself slide into a corner booth with a cup of coffee. "Sometimes I feel like I'm running on autopilot," she muttered to herself, scrolling through her inbox. The name Richard Montgomery popped up in bold, a reminder of the corporate whirlwind she had been a part of for the past 3 years. She'd grown used to his exacting demands, the late nights at the office, and the constant stream of calls and meetings. But tonight's email hinted at something entirely unexpected, a personal request from the man himself. Later that evening, Grace entered the Montgomery estate, her heels clicking against the marble floors. Richard was waiting in his study, seated behind the enormous mahogany desk, papers neatly stacked in front of him. "Ah, Grace," he said, looking up with a warm, if slightly mischievous smile. "Just the woman I wanted to see. Sit down." Grace complied, setting her bags down carefully. "Good evening, Mr. Montgomery. You sounded urgent over email. What's this about?" She studied him closely, noting the subtle weight in his expression that went beyond business matters. Richard leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Grace, I know you've been working tirelessly, juggling everything in your life, and I admire that, truly I do. But tonight, I want to discuss something personal." His tone carried a gravity that immediately piqued Grace's curiosity, and a flicker of unease passed through her. "Personal?" she repeated cautiously. "I wasn't aware I'd overstepped my bounds. You know I—" "Not at all, Grace," Richard interrupted gently. "You've been an invaluable part of my life and my business. That's precisely why I want to discuss this with you." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I want you to marry Ethan." Grace froze, the words hanging in the air like a thunderclap. She blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Excuse me?" she said slowly, her voice tinged with disbelief. "You want me to marry Ethan, your son?" Richard nodded, his expression a mixture of hope and determination. "Yes, think of it not as a whim, but as an opportunity. You know Ethan, ambitious, intelligent, focused, and you have integrity,
diligence, and a strong sense of responsibility. Together, you could make an extraordinary partnership, not just for yourselves, but for our family." Grace recoiled slightly, her mind racing. This was absurd. Ethan Montgomery, with his impeccable suits, sharp intellect, and carefully controlled demeanor, was not someone who would ever consider an arrangement like this. And yet, here was Richard, suggesting it as if it were entirely reasonable. "Mr. Montgomery, you don't even know what to say. This isn't something I can just decide on, and it certainly isn't something I expected from you." Richard's eyes softened. "I understand your hesitation, Grace. Believe me, I do. But I'm not asking for an immediate answer. I want you to think about the possibilities. Your life is full of responsibilities and obligations, yes. But what about your own happiness? Isn't that worth considering?"
Grace ran a hand through her hair, trying to collect her thoughts. She had spent years dreaming of a stable life, a home of her own, a family that she could care for and love. But the idea of marrying someone like Ethan, someone from a world so far removed from her own reality, felt surreal, almost insulting. I can't just marry someone because you suggest it," she said, her tone firm but polite. "Ethan, he's his own person, and I am mine. We don't even know each other outside this office." Richard nodded, leaning forward slightly. "I know, and I don't expect you to, but sometimes life presents opportunities that don't come neatly packaged. You've been loyal, hardworking, and selfless, Grace. Perhaps it's time someone considered your future, not just your present burdens." Grace felt a surge of conflicting emotions: anger, disbelief, and a faint flicker of curiosity. The practicality of her life had always kept her grounded, but Richard's words nudged at something deeper, a longing she rarely allowed herself to acknowledge. "Mr. Montgomery, I appreciate the thought, but this isn't something I can seriously entertain. My life, my family, they depend on me. I can't risk complicating things further." Richard leaned back, a gentle smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I wouldn't ask you to risk anything, Grace. This isn't about pressure or obligation. It's about possibility. You've given so much of yourself to my business, to my family, and to me. I just want to ensure that you also have someone who can share your life, not just your work, but your joys, your sorrows, everything." Grace remained silent for a long moment, her mind spinning. She knew Richard meant well, but the thought of marriage, of stepping into a life completely different from her own, seemed impossible. Yet despite her instinctive refusal, a small voice whispered that this could be a chance for something different, a life not dictated solely by responsibility, a life where she could allow herself to hope. "Mr. Montgomery, I need time to think. This isn't something I can decide in a single evening. I have my family, my jobs, there's so much to consider." Richard's expression softened, and he reached across the desk, placing a reassuring hand near hers. "I understand, Grace. Take all the time you need. No matter what, know that I respect you immensely, and that your future, your happiness, matters to me." Grace nodded, her thoughts still a whirlwind as she gathered her things. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate your concern, truly. But I need to be honest with myself before I consider anything like this. I can't make a choice based on what's expected or convenient." Richard smiled warmly, his eyes reflecting both pride and concern. "Honesty is all I could ever ask for, Grace. That's why I respect you so much. And remember, life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. Sometimes the most unlikely paths lead to the most fulfilling destinations." As Grace stepped out of the Montgomery estate into the cool night air, she felt the weight of the conversation press against her chest. She had always been practical, focused, and cautious. Marriage to Ethan Montgomery seemed almost laughably improbable, yet she couldn't deny a small spark of curiosity, a faint glimmer of possibility that lingered in her mind. Walking down the quiet streets toward her apartment, she reflected on her life. the struggles, the sacrifices, and the relentless pursuit of stability. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a life that might include hope, companionship, and maybe even love. And although she would never admit it out loud, the seed had been planted, and her thoughts returned repeatedly to Ethan, the man she barely knew yet who now occupied her mind more than she expected. By the time Grace reached her modest apartment, she felt both exhausted and strangely restless. She knew one thing for certain: nothing about her life would ever feel quite the same again.
The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Richard Montgomery's study, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Grace sat stiffly in the leather chair across from Ethan, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had been summoned unexpectedly, and the weight of anticipation hung in the air like thick fog. Ethan, dressed in a crisp white shirt and tailored navy trousers, looked every bit the part of a man in control. Yet there was a strange intensity in his gaze, something that made Grace uneasy. She had expected a discussion about work, perhaps even a gentle reprimand about scheduling conflicts. Instead, she found herself staring down a proposal she could hardly believe. "Grace," Ethan began, his tone calm but deliberate, "I know you've been working tirelessly. You manage this company better than most could dream of, but I'm here to talk about something different." He paused, letting his words hang in the silence. "I want us to be married." Grace blinked, her mind freezing for a split second. "Excuse me?" Her voice was incredulous, sharp even. You want me to marry you, just like that?" Ethan ran his hand through his hair, his expression conflicted. "It's not just like that. I mean, I've considered the circumstances. You're exceptional, Grace. Competent, intelligent, grounded. You manage your life and work with precision, and honestly, I respect that more than I can express. But I'm not talking about a conventional marriage. I'm proposing something different." Grace's eyebrows shot up. "Different? What exactly does that mean?" He leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her chest tighten. "A contract. 1 year. No pressure beyond that. We get married, live as a couple, attend social functions, manage the company together in public perception. But at the end of 1 year, we decide if we continue or part ways." Grace stared at him, her mind spinning. Are you serious? You want a contract marriage? Like a business agreement?" She laughed incredulously, though it was edged with disbelief. "You can't be serious. Ethan, this is absurd. I'm your assistant. We barely know each other beyond the office." Ethan's expression softened. "I know, and I don't expect this to be easy. But hear me out. This is a chance for both of us to experiment without binding our hearts forever. There's no obligation beyond the year unless we both choose to continue. I'm not asking you to fall in love overnight. I'm asking for partnership, stability, mutual respect." Grace's mind reeled. She had dreamed of security, of stability for herself and her family, but never like this. She thought of her mother's tired eyes, of her younger brother's school books, and the bills that seemed to multiply faster than she could pay them. Could this strange, unconventional arrangement be a way to help her family? And yet, the thought of marrying Ethan Montgomery, even temporarily, felt like stepping into a world she didn't belong to. I can't just agree to this," she said finally, her voice trembling slightly. It's not something I can consider lightly. Ethan, you don't understand. My life isn't a boardroom or a business deal.
I have responsibilities, a family that depends on me. I can't risk making a mistake like this." Ethan leaned back, his hands clasped together on the desk. "Grace, I understand your hesitation. I do. And I'm not asking for a blind yes. But think about it. You're working nonstop, carrying the weight of your family on your shoulders. This arrangement, it could give you financial stability, time to breathe, and the assurance that your family is taken care of."
Grace's jaw tightened as she fought back the swirl of emotions rising within her. Pride, anger, frustration, and beneath it all, a gnawing fear of what might happen if she ignored the possibility. "And what happens after the year?" she asked, her voice quieter now, almost cautious. "Then we decide," Ethan replied, his tone measured. "If love has developed, we continue. If not, we part ways as friends. No scandals, no shame, no regrets. Just a clean ending. I'm not promising forever, but I am promising honesty, respect, and protection for you and your family." Grace looked away, the image of her mother's anxious expressions flashing in her mind. Her mother had struggled silently for years, juggling multiple part-time jobs, never complaining, always sacrificing. Her younger brother, David, had ambitions and dreams she wanted to nurture, not crush. Could she justify refusing this unusual offer, knowing it might ease their burdens? "Ethan," she began hesitantly, "I don't like this. I don't like the idea of marrying someone I barely know, even for a year. But I also can't ignore my family's needs. They depend on me." Her hands twisted in her lap, uncertainty etched on her face. "If I agree, it would be for them, not for me. Not for love, not for anything else." Ethan's gaze softened, a mixture of understanding and relief passing over his features. "I don't expect love immediately, Grace. That's not the point. I only ask that we respect each other, that we honor the arrangement honestly. And if it helps your family, then perhaps it serves a greater purpose than either of us imagined." Grace bit her lip, the conflict within her intensifying. Her life had always been about doing what was necessary, not what was desired. Pride and independence warred with obligation and practicality. And yet the very idea of saying yes, even reluctantly, left her with a strange flutter of apprehension mixed with curiosity. I need to think about this," she said finally, her voice trembling slightly. It's a lot. This isn't just about me. I have responsibilities. I have obligations. And I can't make a decision like this lightly." Ethan nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Take all the time you need, Grace. I don't expect an answer tonight. But know this, opportunity doesn't always knock twice. And sometimes the most unexpected choices bring the greatest rewards." Grace stood, gathering her things, though her mind felt like a storm of emotions. I'll consider it," she said finally, the words tasting strange as they left her lips. "For my family, but I'm not making promises about anything else." Richard, who had entered quietly during their conversation and had been observing from a distance, stepped forward. "Grace," he said gently, "whatever choice you make, know that you have our support. This isn't about pressure or obligation. It's about opportunity. You've given so much of yourself to our family and our company. Now it's time to consider yourself." Grace nodded, feeling a mixture of guilt, anxiety, and something she couldn't quite name, possibility. She had always lived cautiously, placing the needs of others above her own. But for the first time, she glimpsed a path that might allow her to do both, care for her family, while stepping into a life that, though uncertain, might offer stability and even adventure. And with that thought lingering in her mind, she stepped out of the Montgomery estate and into the Texas afternoon, knowing her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined.
The morning air outside the Austin Municipal Courthouse was crisp and unusually still for early spring. Grace Miller adjusted the strap of her modest handbag nervously as she walked up the stone steps, her heart beating faster with each step. Today was surreal, a day she had never imagined for herself, and yet it was happening. The idea of marrying Ethan Montgomery, even for a contract, made her feel as if she were walking a tightrope over unknown waters. Each step toward the entrance felt heavier than the last, as if she carried not just her own hesitation, but the weight of her family's hopes on her shoulders. Ethan arrived a few minutes later, his black suit impeccably tailored, his hair neatly combed, his expression calm but tense. He caught sight of Grace from a distance and walked toward her, hands in pockets, a measured rhythm to his steps. "Morning," he said quietly, nodding in acknowledgement. There was no warmth in his voice, only polite formality. Grace looked up, meeting his gaze with a flicker of discomfort, unsure whether to smile or scowl. "Morning," she replied, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. She hesitated, then added, almost involuntarily, "I never thought I'd be standing here like this." Ethan offered a small, dry smile. "Neither did I, but here we are." Life has a funny way of putting people exactly where they need to be, even if it feels absurd at first. Grace blinked, feeling the tension between them thicken. They were two strangers, bound not by love or familiarity, but by circumstance and obligation. The courthouse steps felt symbolic of the journey ahead, public enough to be real, yet stripped of ceremony, intimacy, or comfort. Inside, the waiting area was sparsely furnished, with worn chairs and a faint scent of disinfectant in the air. A few other couples were scattered around, quietly murmuring to one another. Grace and Ethan sat side by side, maintaining an almost rigid distance. Neither reached for the other's hand, neither exchanged more than the occasional word. The silence between them was oppressive and protective, a shield against vulnerability neither was prepared to offer. "Have you considered what this means? Not just today, but the year ahead?"
Ethan's eyes flicked toward her, his expression unreadable. "Yes, I've considered it. And I've considered the complications, the obligations, the risks. But this is the arrangement we agreed upon. 1 year, nothing more. We honor it, we fulfill it, and we part as agreed if nothing changes." His tone was firm, bordering on detached. "That's all I can promise." Grace nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words press down on her. "I understand. I don't want conflict. She stopped herself, realizing she didn't know what she wanted to say. There was a strange conflict inside her. Relief that the terms were clear, yet unease at how unfamiliar and formal this world already felt. Minutes later, a court clerk called their names and they rose together, moving toward the small sunlit room where the ceremony would take place. The walls were pale and unadorned, the furniture minimal. A single bouquet of white daisies rested on a corner table, offering a faint touch of decorum. Grace and Ethan faced each other across the desk, the officiant in front of them, papers neatly stacked. The clerk began, her tone monotone but efficient. "We are gathered here today to witness the marriage of Ethan Montgomery and Grace Miller." She glanced down at the documents. "Do you, Ethan Montgomery, take Grace Miller to be your lawfully wedded spouse to honor, respect, and uphold the terms agreed upon in your contract for 1 year?"
Ethan cleared his throat, his voice measured and precise. "I do."
And do you, Grace Miller, take Ethan Montgomery to be your lawfully wedded spouse, to honor, respect, and uphold the terms agreed upon in your contract for 1 year? The clerk asked. Grace's fingers fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve. Her voice came out steadier than she felt inside. I do. The words hung in the air like fragile glass, beautiful yet brittle. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the enormity of the commitment settling in. It was a marriage without romance, without shared history, without even a whisper of intimacy. Yet the legal weight of it made the arrangement undeniable, binding them together in ways neither had fully anticipated. The clerk smiled faintly, finishing the procedure. By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you legally married. You may sign the documents. Ethan and Grace approached the desk together, the sound of pens scratching on paper echoing faintly in the quiet room. Their hands brushed accidentally at one point, sending an unexpected shiver through Grace. She quickly withdrew, cheeks tinged with color, focusing on the signatures instead of the fleeting warmth of contact. As they stepped back, the clerk handed them copies of the paperwork, and the ceremony ended as quietly as it had begun. Outside the courthouse, the sun had climbed higher, casting a bright light on the city's streets. Grace and Ethan descended the steps in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The bustling city seemed oblivious to their new reality, a reality they had entered not for love, but for obligation and circumstance. "Shall we go?" Ethan asked, finally, his tone neutral, almost businesslike. Grace nodded, adjusting her bag. "Yes, let's." The drive back to Montgomery Industries was filled with an uneasy quiet. Neither spoke much, their minds preoccupied with the practicalities of their arrangement. Ethan's eyes occasionally flicked toward Grace, noting her tense posture and the faint flush on her cheeks, but he offered no words of comfort. Grace, in turn, stared out the window, trying to mentally prepare for the day-to-day reality of living alongside a man she barely knew. When they arrived at the estate, Richard greeted them with a mixture of pride and relief, his eyes gleaming. "Congratulations, both of you. I know this wasn't easy, but you've taken the first step. Now, life goes on, and I trust you'll navigate it with care and respect." Grace forced a polite smile, murmuring a quiet, "Thank you, sir." Ethan merely nodded, his expression unreadable. Inside, though, both felt the weight of what lay ahead. They were married, legally bound, yet emotionally distant. Their relationship was formal, awkward, and tenuous, a fragile structure of obligation with no foundation of trust or affection. Later that evening, as they sat in adjacent chairs in the Montgomery family living room, Grace carefully sipped a cup of tea while Ethan reviewed company reports on a tablet. The silence between them was thick, almost tangible, broken only by the occasional rustle of papers or the hum of the air conditioner. Neither dared initiate conversation, each wary of breaking the fragile balance of politeness that defined their current reality. Finally, Grace spoke, her voice hesitant. "Ethan, I suppose we should discuss boundaries, rules, how we'll manage this year." Ethan looked up, his expression serious. "Yes, we should. Respect and honesty, Grace. That's all I ask. No overstepping, no assumptions, no surprises." I agreed. "We'll keep things professional, structured, and we'll honor the contract fully." Her tone carried both determination and resignation, the duality of someone stepping into an unfamiliar life while protecting herself from emotional exposure. As the night drew on, both retreated to their separate rooms within the Montgomery estate. The quiet of the house contrasted sharply with the turbulence of their thoughts. They were strangers, bound by a legal document, facing a year of formal coexistence. Every glance, every word, every shared meal would now carry weight and consequence. And as Grace lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, she realized with a mixture of apprehension and inevitability that nothing would ever be the same. She had entered into a life dictated by contract and obligation, and the path ahead was uncharted, full of possibilities she wasn't yet ready to face, or perhaps possibilities she had secretly longed for all along.
The rain had been relentless all afternoon, turning the highways outside Austin into slick sheets of glistening black. Ethan gripped the steering wheel with tight knuckles, eyes fixed on the road ahead,
as windshield wipers fought valiantly against the downpour. The streetlights reflected like fractured diamonds on the wet asphalt, and the hum of the tires on the waterlogged pavement was the only sound in the otherwise empty stretch. Ethan had intended to head home early that evening, but an unexpected meeting at the office had kept him later than usual, and now the storm seemed to have gathered just to challenge him. Grace sat in her small apartment, reviewing financial reports for her mother's business, when her phone buzzed. She glanced down and frowned at the incoming call, Ethan's number. She answered on the second ring, expecting a quick work-related question, but the static of the storm made his voice barely audible. "Grace, I'm stuck. The road. The rain." Then a loud crash of metal, a scream, and the line went dead. Her heart stopped. "Ethan?" she shouted into the phone, but only the rain's roar answered back. Panic surged through her, and without a moment's hesitation, Grace grabbed her keys and rushed into her car. The streets were treacherous, the rain blurring her vision, but she drove with a fierce determination. Every red light felt like an eternity, every corner a test of her nerves. The thought of Ethan, lying hurt somewhere, vulnerable and alone, propelled her forward faster than caution would normally allow. She prayed silently, hoping against hope that he was still alive. Meanwhile, Ethan struggled in the wreckage of his car. The impact had crumpled the front of the vehicle, airbags deployed, and the steering wheel pressed awkwardly against his chest. Pain radiated from his shoulder and ribs, sharp and unyielding, but adrenaline kept him from fully realizing the extent of his injuries. He tried to move, but a searing pain shot through his leg, forcing him to stay put. "Grace, I'm okay. Mostly." His attempt at levity only made Grace's panic worse. She pressed her hands against his shoulder, feeling the heat and trembling beneath her touch. "Mostly okay? Ethan, you're bleeding and you're hurt. We need help now." She fumbled for her phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers as she tried to keep him conscious. The emergency responders arrived within minutes, though to Grace it felt like hours. They worked quickly, assessing Ethan's injuries, immobilizing his body, and carefully moving him onto a stretcher. Grace followed closely, refusing to let go of his hand, even as paramedics guided her back. "You're going to be fine," she murmured, squeezing his hand tightly. "Just hang on, I'm right here." Hours later, Ethan lay in a private hospital room, bandages covering the cuts and bruises that marred his face and arms. His shoulder was in a sling, his leg heavily supported, and a faint beep of a monitor filled the quiet room. Grace sat beside him, holding a damp cloth to his forehead, gently brushing the wet strands of hair from his face. She hadn't left his side since the accident, her concern overriding the professional distance that had defined their relationship for months. "You didn't have to stay," Ethan murmured, his voice weak but teasing, attempting to mask the vulnerability he rarely showed. "You could have gone home, called it a night."
Grace shook her head, her eyes filled with resolve. "I couldn't. You needed me, and I'm not about to let my husband sit here like this alone, injured and miserable. Contract or not, you matter, Ethan." Her words surprised even her. She hadn't realized she'd spoken aloud what had been stirring in her heart. Ethan's lips quirked into a faint, tired smile. "I appreciate it." He coughed softly, wincing as pain shot through his chest. "I guess I underestimated you." Grace offered a gentle smile in return, dabbing the cloth against his forehead. "And I underestimated you too. I thought you'd be distant, unreachable. But seeing you like this, helpless, human, it changes things." Her voice faltered slightly, the confession slipping out unintentionally. Over the next several days, Grace tended to Ethan with meticulous care. She ensured he took his medication on time, helped him dress, and even prepared meals for him when he wasn't allowed to leave the bed. At first, their interactions were still tinged with formality, a necessary adherence to the contract, but slowly the barriers began to erode. Ethan, who had always been controlled and disciplined, allowed himself to rely on her, and Grace, who had always maintained her independence, found herself drawn to his presence, the subtle vulnerability that peeked through his usually composed exterior. One evening, as rain tapped gently against the windowpane, Ethan sighed, leaning back against the pillows. "Grace, I don't know what I'd do without you. I've always been self-sufficient, but I guess I didn't realize how much I need someone to care." Grace offered a gentle smile in return, the warmth spreading through her chest, the unspoken connection between them growing stronger with each passing day. "You're not alone anymore, Ethan. You don't have to be. And I'll be here. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Because you're important to me." Ethan swallowed, his throat tight, emotions he rarely expressed rising to the surface. "Grace, thank you. For everything." I paused, clearing his throat, embarrassed by the rare admission. I don't know how I'd repay you." "You don't need to, Grace. Just get better. That's all I want. That's all anyone could ask for." As the days passed, the awkwardness that had defined their relationship began to soften. Small gestures, a shared cup of tea, a laugh at a clumsy joke, a lingering look hinted at a growing familiarity and trust. They were still bound by the contract, still navigating the complex rules of their arrangement, but something new was forming, a quiet, unspoken understanding, a subtle warmth that neither could ignore. By the time Ethan was discharged from the hospital, the dynamic between them had shifted. They still maintained a professional distance in public, but the private moments, the gentle touches, the quiet conversations, and the care and concern revealed a tenderness neither had anticipated. The cold arrangement that had begun their marriage was slowly thawing, melting into something more human, more real. As they drove back to the Montgomery estate that morning, the rain finally easing into a soft drizzle, Ethan glanced at Grace, a faint, genuine smile tugging at his lips. "You know, I don't think I ever thanked you properly. For everything. For staying, for helping, for being here." Grace returned his gaze, a small smile of her own forming. "You don't need to thank me, Ethan. That's what partners do. Even contract partners, apparently." Ethan chuckled softly, the sound carrying a rare ease. "I guess this contract marriage might not be so bad after all." Grace laughed quietly, shaking her head. "Don't get used to it. 1 year, remember, and don't think I'm letting you off easy." Ethan smiled, feeling something unfamiliar but comforting settle in his chest. For the first time since their marriage, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this year wouldn't be defined solely by obligation.
The days that followed Ethan's discharge from the hospital were filled with a delicate rhythm, a quiet dance of familiarity and cautious intimacy. Grace continued to care for him, helping him regain strength, while Ethan, who had always prided himself on self-sufficiency, found himself relying on her in ways he had never anticipated. Their interactions, once stiff and formal, had begun to soften. Small gestures, a hand offered to steady him on the stairs, a shared cup of coffee on the terrace, casual conversation about trivial matters began to bridge the distance between them. It was a friendship forged not from choice, but from circumstance, yet it carried a warmth neither could deny. "Ethan," Grace said one morning, adjusting the cushion behind his back as he read the company reports, "you really shouldn't be pushing yourself so hard. You're still recovering, remember?" Her tone was gentle but firm, as though the care she poured into him extended to the discipline she demanded. Ethan looked up from the papers, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. I know, Grace, but if I don't keep up with work, the entire company feels my absence. And besides, I don't know what I'd do without you keeping me in line. His voice was teasing, but there was a sincerity beneath it that warmed her heart. Grace chuckled softly, shaking her head. You're incorrigible. Maybe that's why I keep letting you do this. But don't think I'm going to coddle you forever. You need to learn some independence, too. Ethan raised an eyebrow, pretending to be offended. Independence? I was perfectly independent before the accident. He paused, his expression softening as he added quietly, and I suppose I still am, but it's nicer having you around. Grace felt a faint flutter in her chest, a warmth she tried to suppress. She busied herself with organizing his papers, hiding the sudden awareness of how much she had grown attached to him. Their days became a mixture of light-hearted moments and quiet companionship. They ate breakfast together, sometimes shared evening walks around the estate, and even laughed at the occasional mishap in the kitchen, each finding comfort in the other's presence. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of pink and orange, Grace found herself sitting beside Ethan on the terrace, a cup of tea warming her hands. The air was crisp, the scent of blooming flowers mingling with the faint hum of the city below. For a moment, they sat in silence, neither feeling the need to speak, the unspoken connection between them stronger than any words could convey. You know, Ethan said finally, breaking the quiet, I didn't expect any of this. I thought a contract marriage would be simple, a formality, nothing more. His voice was low, contemplative, and Grace turned slightly to meet his gaze. Nothing more? She repeated softly, her curiosity piqued. Ethan smiled faintly, a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. I meant, I didn't expect to like this. Not you specifically, not the connection we've built. But here we are. Grace felt her chest tighten, a mixture of warmth and unease washing over her. She looked down at her cup, hiding the sudden blush rising in her cheeks. I didn't expect it either, she admitted, her voice quiet. I thought I could keep things strictly professional, keep my distance. But this, what we have, isn't entirely by choice anymore, is it? No, Ethan said softly, his eyes lingering on her. It's not. And I don't want to ruin it by expecting more than it is. I value what we have. Even if it's just friendship, even if it's just companionship, it's enough for now. Grace nodded, her heart aching at the restrained honesty in his words. She understood. He was cautious, guarded, afraid to cross boundaries that neither had fully explored. And yet, the unspoken affection between them grew stronger with each passing day. Every glance, every smile, every shared moment was a thread weaving them together, a tapestry of feelings neither dared to name.
Weeks turned into months, and the year of their contract marriage drew closer to its end. The thought of it coming to a close filled Grace with a mixture of dread and apprehension. She had grown used to his presence, to the warmth that had slowly blossomed between them, and the idea of losing it was almost unbearable. Yet she also feared the vulnerability that confessing her feelings might bring. She kept them buried, hidden beneath layers of practicality and restraint. One evening, as they sat in the living room after dinner, Ethan spoke with a seriousness that immediately set Grace on edge. "Grace, we need to talk." Her stomach tightened and she braced herself. "About the contract?" she asked, her voice measured but anxious. Ethan nodded, setting down his glass of water. "Yes, the year is almost over, and I've been thinking a lot about what comes next." His gaze was steady, but there was a weight in his expression that made Grace's heart flutter nervously. "And what have you decided?" she asked, trying to mask the anxiety in her voice. Ethan took a deep breath, his jaw tight. "I think we should part ways, as friends. The contract ends, and that's it." Grace felt as though the air had been knocked from her lungs. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the armchair. "Part ways?" she echoed, disbelief and hurt mingling in her voice. "After everything? After the year we've spent together? You want to end it?"
Ethan's eyes softened, guilt flickering in their depths. I don't want to hurt you, Grace, but I need to be honest with myself. I'm confused about my emotions, and I don't want to risk complicating things further. We've grown close, yes, but love, real love, I'm not sure I can offer that. Not yet. Grace's throat tightened, and she swallowed hard, fighting back tears. She had allowed herself to hope, to imagine that the warmth and connection they shared might evolve into something deeper. And now, the foundation beneath her was crumbling. So, that's it? After everything we've shared, you're just walking away? Ethan nodded slowly, his expression conflicted. I think it's the best for both of us. We care about each other, yes, but parting as friends preserves the respect and trust we've built. It avoids disappointment, heartbreak, complications neither of us need. Grace's vision blurred, but she refused to let tears fall. I understand, she said finally, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. I just hoped that maybe we could. She trailed off, realizing there was nothing more to say. I'm sorry, Grace, Ethan murmured, reaching out instinctively, then hesitating, letting his hand drop to his lap instead. I truly am. I wish I could offer more certainty. I wish I knew how to feel for us, for this. Grace nodded again, her chest aching. I'll respect your decision, she whispered, the hurt in her voice carefully masked by controlled composure. I need some time. The next morning, Grace packed her belongings quietly, leaving the Montgomery estate without a word. The drive back to her apartment felt heavy, each mile a reminder of what she had lost and what she had allowed herself to feel. The friendship, the moments of tenderness, the subtle warmth, they were all gone, replaced by the cold reality of parting. Ethan watched her leave from the terrace, his chest tight with a strange mix of relief and regret. He knew he had made the right choice for now, yet the sight of her walking away stirred an ache he hadn't expected. The year had changed them both, softened barriers, created bonds, and opened doors to emotions neither had dared to acknowledge. And though the contract had ended, the consequences of their closeness lingered, unresolved and potent. As Grace drove through the city streets, her heart heavy, she realized the depth of her feelings for Ethan, feelings that could no longer be ignored or contained. And though she kept them buried, the memory of their laughter, their quiet conversations, and their unspoken connection remained, a bittersweet reminder of what had been and what might never be again.
The city skyline glittered through the office windows, the lights of Austin shimmering against the night sky like a million tiny promises. Ethan Montgomery sat behind the massive mahogany desk in his new office, his posture rigid, his fingers tapping absent-mindedly against the polished surface. He had worked tirelessly over the past months, climbing the corporate ladder, expanding Montgomery Industries' renewable energy ventures, and cementing his reputation as a sharp, capable leader. Yet, despite all the accolades, the press coverage, and the financial milestones, a hollow ache gnawed at his chest. Success, he realized, was meaningless without the presence of the one person who had once made even mundane moments feel extraordinary. "Ethan, are you coming to the board dinner tonight?" his assistant asked, breaking him from his thoughts. He looked up, forcing a polite smile. "Not tonight. I have other priorities." His voice was flat, detached. There was no excitement, no anticipation, just the mechanical delivery of words. The assistant hesitated, sensing the unusual heaviness in his demeanor. "Sir, is everything all right?" Ethan shook his head, staring out the window at the city lights. "I'm fine. Just, tired, I suppose." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. It wasn't exhaustion from work or stress from business. It was the emptiness that had taken root in his heart since Grace had walked out of his life.
In the weeks following the end of their contract, Ethan had thrown himself into his work with a fervor that left little room for reflection. Yet no promotion, no expansion deal, no investor meeting could fill the void she had left behind. Every triumph felt hollow because there was no one to share it with. Every congratulatory email, every handshake, every photograph in the business magazines reminded him of the laughter and warmth that had once existed in his home, now absent. One evening, a message arrived from a mutual acquaintance, a former employee who'd kept in touch with Grace. Ethan scrolled through the text, his eyes widening in disbelief as he read. Grace has been ostracized. People know about the marriage. They treat her like she's a fraud, like she's something to be ashamed of. She's struggling, Ethan. She didn't deserve this. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he set the phone down, the weight of guilt settling over him like a heavy shroud. He had known that ending the contract would hurt her emotionally, but he hadn't anticipated the social repercussions, the whispers and judgments that had followed. The realization hit him hard. While he had moved forward, focused on his success, Grace had been left vulnerable, isolated, and ridiculed. He pushed away from his desk and began pacing the office, the leather soles of his shoes clicking against the floor. "How could I have been so blind?" he muttered to himself. "I thought ending it as friends would protect her. I thought I was being fair. And now this is my fault." Richard, his father, noticed the change in him during their weekly dinner. The usual playful banter was absent. Instead, Ethan was quiet, withdrawn, his eyes shadowed with worry. "Ethan, what's going on with you?" Richard asked, concern lacing his voice. "You've been different lately, more distracted than usual." Ethan rubbed his temples, struggling to articulate the storm of guilt and regret consuming him. "It's Grace. People have been cruel to her. About the marriage, about us. And I let it happen. I ended it, thinking it was the right decision. But I didn't consider what it would do to her life." Richard's eyes softened with understanding, a father's empathy shining through. "Son, sometimes doing what seems right doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. But what matters is what you do now. You can't change the past, but you can take responsibility. You can try to make amends." Ethan nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "I want to. I don't even know where to start. She's been hurt so deeply. She trusted me, and I betrayed that trust. And now, I feel like everything I've achieved is meaningless if she isn't part of it." Richard placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Then start by finding her. Apologize. Show her that you care. Sometimes the heart doesn't measure success in wealth or power. It measures it in love and loyalty. Don't let pride or fear keep you from what truly matters." Ethan left the dinner that night with a restless energy, the words of his father echoing in his mind. He replayed every memory of their time together, the hospital room after the accident, the late-night conversations, the quiet moments of understanding, and realized how much he had taken Grace for granted. Each memory carried a pang of longing, a reminder that his accomplishments were hollow without her presence to share them. The next day, he went through the motions of his busy schedule, but his mind was elsewhere. Every meeting felt tedious, every phone call empty. Investors discussed expansion plans, competitors' strategies, and profit margins, but Ethan's thoughts remained fixed on Grace, her smile, her warmth, the way she had cared for him when he was at his most vulnerable. During a rare quiet moment in his office, he scrolled through his contacts, hesitating over her name. His thumb hovered above the call button, his heart pounding with fear and anticipation. Could he reach out? Would she even speak to him after everything? And yet, he couldn't bear the thought of letting another day pass without trying to make amends. Instead of calling, he sent a brief, carefully worded message. Grace, I've learned about what you've endured. I was wrong, and I regret ending things the way I did. I want to make it right, if you'll allow me. Please let me know if we can meet." Minutes later, the phone remained silent, and Ethan's chest tightened with anxiety. He felt the weight of every decision he had made over the past months pressing down on him. He had achieved professional success, amassed wealth, and gained recognition, but none of it brought the satisfaction or joy he had imagined. The victories felt empty without Grace to witness them, to share in the quiet triumphs and celebrations of life. As evening descended over the city, Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the skyline once more. He realized that no title, no paycheck, no accolades could replace the connection he had lost. Hollow success, he understood now, was the consequence of neglecting what truly mattered. And what mattered most was Grace, the woman who had been his friend, his caretaker, his unexpected companion, and the one person who had made his life feel complete. In the solitude of his office, Ethan made a silent vow. He would find her, he would apologize in person, and he would do everything in his power to repair the damage he had caused, to show her that his heart, however late, had recognized the depth of his feelings. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Success without Grace was meaningless, and he would not rest until he had made amends. That night, Ethan left the office later than usual, the city lights reflecting in his eyes like the scattered pieces of a life he longed to rebuild. The emptiness inside him fueled a determination stronger than any ambition or business goal. He had learned the hard way that achievements alone could never satisfy the heart, and he was ready to confront the consequences of his actions, no matter how difficult or humbling they might be. As he drove through the quiet streets of Austin, Ethan whispered to himself, almost as a prayer, "I'll find you, Grace, and I'll make this right. No more hollow victories, only truth, only us."
Grace adjusted her blazer nervously as she walked through the polished glass doors of Montgomery Industries, her new job fresh and full of promise. She had been offered a position in the finance department, a step up from her previous roles, and an opportunity she couldn't afford to pass up. She reminded herself that she was here to focus on her career, to build stability for her family, and to leave the past where it belonged. Ethan Montgomery, the man whose presence still lingered in her thoughts, was supposed to be a chapter closed, a memory she had tried desperately to suppress. As she approached the reception desk, she noticed the familiar nameplate, Ethan Montgomery, CEO. Her heart skipped a beat, and a cold wave of panic swept through her. She had expected a lot of things upon taking this job, but seeing his name in bold letters, confirming he had risen even higher in the company, was not one of them. She gripped her bag strap tighter, trying to steady her racing pulse. "Stay calm," she whispered to herself. "You're here to work, nothing more." Her first day went smoothly, at least superficially. She was introduced to her team, briefed on her responsibilities, and shown to her office space. Yet the knowledge that Ethan's office was just a few floors above made it impossible to relax. She busied herself with work, letting spreadsheets and financial statements absorb her attention, refusing to think about the man who had once held a unique place in her heart. Later that afternoon, she found herself walking past the executive wing when a voice called her name. "Grace." Her body stiffened. She turned slowly, and there he was, Ethan Montgomery, taller than she remembered, dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of authority, yet his expression betrayed an unexpected vulnerability. The faint lines around his eyes hinted at the weight he had carried in the months since their separation. "Grace," he said cautiously, forcing a polite smile. "I didn't expect to see you here." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I didn't expect to see you either. I should have known you'd end up here eventually." There was a pause as he studied her, a mixture of longing and regret in his gaze. "Grace, I need to talk to you." She shook her head, her voice firm despite the flutter in her chest. "Ethan, now isn't the right time. I have work to do." She started to walk away, but he gently touched her arm, halting her movement. "Please," he said quietly, almost pleading. "I know I don't have the right, but I need you to hear me. I've made so many mistakes, and losing you was the worst of them. I can't pretend otherwise." Grace looked up at him, her eyes hardening. "Ethan, you ended it. You left me to face the world alone, humiliated, ostracized. Do you think words now can undo that?" Her voice was steady, but the tremor in it betrayed the pain she still carried. Ethan swallowed, guilt flashing across his face. "I know, and I'm not asking for forgiveness, not yet. I'm asking for a chance to make things right, to prove that I've changed, that I understand the hurt I caused you. Grace, please, don't shut me out completely." She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay composed. "You don't get to rewrite the past, Ethan. I trusted you once, and you betrayed that trust. I won't allow myself to be hurt again. Not for a contract, not for anything." He nodded slowly, his expression pained but resolute. "I understand, and I don't expect anything from you. I had to say it. I had to tell you that I regret every moment I caused you pain. You deserve better than what I gave you." Grace's hands tightened around her bag strap as she turned away, fighting the urge to retreat further into herself. Her mind raced with memories of their marriage, the hospital, the quiet companionship, the rare moments of warmth, and the sting of his abandonment. She had worked hard to rebuild her life, to focus on her family and her career, and she wasn't willing to risk it for someone who had once walked away. I need to focus on my work, Ethan," she said finally, her tone polite but unyielding. "This is my second chance at stability, and I won't jeopardize it for the past."
Ethan's shoulders slumped slightly, but his eyes remained fixed on her. "I respect that. I'll stay out of your way, Grace. I promise. But I hope someday you'll let me show you that my feelings were real, that I can be someone you can trust." Grace nodded curtly and walked away, her heart pounding despite her resolve. She refused to look back, refused to let herself betray the strength she had built in the months since their separation. Yet deep inside, a small, stubborn part of her could not deny the lingering pull she felt toward him, the memories, the unspoken connection, the warmth they had once shared. Over the next few weeks, their interactions were professional, almost painfully so. Ethan respected her boundaries, keeping his distance, but Grace could feel the weight of his presence in the office. Occasionally, he would leave subtle notes of encouragement or offer assistance on projects, each gesture a reminder of the man he had been, and the man she remembered with a mix of resentment and longing. One afternoon, as they found themselves working late in the same conference room, Ethan broke the silence. "Grace, I know you don't want to hear this, but I can't pretend I'm okay with just being distant. I care about you, and I can't just ignore it." Grace looked up from her laptop, meeting his gaze squarely. "Ethan, I warned you. I won't risk my trust again. Not now, not ever, if it means exposing myself to the hurt I've already endured." He nodded, understanding her resolve, but the look in his eyes was full of sincerity and remorse. "I know, and I'll wait, as long as it takes. I'll earn your trust back if you'll ever let me." Grace's chest tightened. She wanted to believe him, to allow herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, the man who had once hurt her could change. But her past experiences, the betrayal and the humiliation still lingered. She closed her laptop with deliberate finality. "I appreciate your words, Ethan, truly. But my life, my peace, is not something I can gamble on. You've shown me who you were once, and that memory is not easy to forget." He remained silent, watching her leave the room, her posture a mixture of confidence and lingering vulnerability. He knew that the road ahead would be long and uncertain, that winning back her trust would not be simple. Yet he also knew that he could not walk away. Not this time. Grace was too important, too integral to the sense of completeness he had been missing for months. As Grace returned to her office, she felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her: frustration, longing, and the stubborn pull of unfinished business. She had come to Montgomery Industries to build a life for herself, to focus on her career and her family. Yet now, the past had walked back into her world, complicated every plan, and reminded her that some ties, however frayed, could never be fully severed. Ethan watched from his office, the city lights casting shadows across his face. He knew she was right to be cautious, knew that trust was fragile and could not be demanded, but he also knew that he could not remain distant forever. He had made mistakes, yes, but the time for excuses had passed. The time for action, for sincerity, and for proving the depth of his feelings had arrived. And in the quiet of that evening, both of them understood something unspoken. The reunion, though fraught with pain and mistrust, had opened the door to possibilities neither had expected. Whether Grace would walk through it or keep it closed remained to be seen, but for Ethan, the resolution was clear. He would fight for her trust, no matter how long it took, no matter the obstacles in their path.
Grace sat on the edge of her bed, her hands trembling as she stared at the small white stick lying on the bathroom counter. The result had confirmed what she had suspected over the past few weeks. She was pregnant. The thought should have brought joy, a sense of anticipation for new beginnings, but instead a storm of emotions churned within her. There was fear, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. Most of all, there was Ethan, the man who had hurt her, walked away, and yet still lingered in her heart and mind. She ran her fingers through her hair, trying to steady herself. "How did this happen?" she whispered aloud, though she knew the answer. Their time together had been brief but intimate, and now the consequence had arrived, tangible and undeniable. Grace felt a pang of guilt for allowing herself to be vulnerable again, for letting her guard down, and for the undeniable fact that her life was about to change forever. The following days were filled with a tense mix of normalcy and inner turmoil. Grace tried to maintain her composure at work, focusing on spreadsheets, reports, and client meetings, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the life growing inside her. Every morning she woke with a mix of apprehension and awe, wondering how she would navigate this revelation and how or if she would tell Ethan. The mere thought of him knowing sent shivers down her spine. One evening, as she sat in her apartment reviewing documents for a major project, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Ethan.
"Grace, can we talk? It's important. I promise nothing heavy, just a conversation." Her stomach twisted. Did he know? Could he sense? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, debating whether to respond. After a long pause, she typed back cautiously, "We can talk tomorrow at the office." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, knowing that delaying would only increase the tension gnawing at her heart. The next morning, Grace arrived early at Montgomery Industries, her mind a whirlwind of strategy and fear. She found Ethan waiting near the conference room, his expression unreadable, though his eyes softened as soon as he saw her. For a moment, neither spoke, the air heavy with unspoken words. "Grace, can we talk? It's important. I promise nothing heavy, just a conversation." His stomach twisted. Did he know? Could he sense? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, debating whether to respond. After a long pause, she typed back cautiously, "We can talk tomorrow at the office."
She hit send before she could second-guess herself, knowing that delaying would only increase the tension gnawing at her heart. The next morning, Grace arrived early at Montgomery Industries, her mind a whirlwind of strategy and fear. She found Ethan waiting near the conference room, his expression unreadable, though his eyes softened as soon as he saw her. For a moment, neither spoke, the air heavy with unspoken words. "Grace, I know things have been complicated between us, and I don't want to make them more difficult, but I need to be honest with you." She nodded, maintaining a neutral expression, though her heart pounded in her chest. "I'm listening," she said, her voice steady despite the tumult inside. Ethan took a deep breath, stepping closer but leaving enough space to respect her boundaries. "I've realized my mistakes, my pride, my fear of confronting my feelings, they hurt you. And I can't go on pretending that I'm okay with how things ended. Grace, He paused, searching for the right words. "I want another chance. I want to prove that I can be the man you deserve, that I can be trustworthy, loyal, and loving." Grace felt a wave of emotion rise within her, one that was a confusing blend of hope, anger, and fear. "Ethan," she said, carefully, choosing each word, "you've already had a chance. You walked away. You left me alone to face the world when it all became too much. I don't know if I should trust you again." He reached out, hesitating, then withdrew, understanding the boundaries she was asserting. "I know, and I'll respect that. I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness. I'm asking for the opportunity to show that I've changed, that I understand the depth of my mistakes. Grace, please." Her chest tightened, and she glanced down at her hands, trying to collect herself. She felt a sudden wave of nausea, the physical reminder of the secret she carried. Panic prickled at her mind. Could she tell him now? Could she reveal the pregnancy and risk further complication? Or should she keep it to herself until she was certain of her next steps?
Finally, after a long pause, she lifted her eyes to meet his. "Ethan, there's something you need to know," she said softly, her voice trembling. I'm pregnant. Your child." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Ethan froze, the color draining slightly from his face as he processed the revelation. His eyes widened, and for a moment, no words came. Then his voice broke, a mixture of shock, awe, and unspoken emotion. "Pregnant? With my child?" he repeated, barely able to believe it. Grace nodded, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Yes, and I don't know what this means for us, for you, for me, for our fractured relationship, but I thought you had the right to know. You deserve to know." Ethan stepped closer, his eyes searching hers, and she could see a kaleidoscope of emotions: regret, hope, fear, and determination. "Grace, I don't know what to say. This changes everything." She shook her head slightly, tears threatening to spill. "Not everything has to change, Ethan. I'm not asking for commitment or promises. I want you to know, and I want to figure out how to handle this responsibly, for the child." Ethan exhaled slowly, his gaze softening. "For the child," he echoed, repeating the words as though savoring the weight of the responsibility. "You're right. This isn't just about us anymore. And I want to be there. I want to support you. I want to be a father to my child." Grace felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. She wanted to believe him, to allow herself a glimmer of hope that he could rise to the occasion. But the past, the pain, the broken trust remained a formidable barrier. "I don't know if I can trust you, Ethan. Not yet.
Not after everything." "I understand," he said softly, his eyes glistening. "And I'll earn your trust. I swear it. I'll be patient. I'll be careful. But please, don't shut me out completely. Don't let me miss this chance to do right by you and by our child." Grace looked away, her heart pounding. The weight of the secret she had carried alone was suddenly shared, and though it brought a measure of relief, it also magnified the complexity of their situation. She realized that her life was about to change irrevocably, that the choices she made in the coming days would shape the future for herself, for Ethan, and for the child growing inside her. I need time," she said finally, her voice soft but resolute. "I need to think about how to move forward. I can't decide everything in this moment." Ethan nodded, a faint, understanding smile appearing despite the tension in his jaw. "Take all the time you need, Grace. I'll wait. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll be here when you're ready to talk, when you're ready to let me be a part of this." As Grace left the conference room, the weight of the revelation pressed heavily on her shoulders, but a small spark of determination ignited within her. She would navigate this new reality carefully, protecting herself and her child while facing the consequences of a love that had once been fractured, but not entirely lost. Ethan watched her go, a mixture of awe and resolve settling over him. He knew the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, that earning her trust would not be easy, and that the child added a layer of responsibility he could not ignore. Yet, for the first time in months, he felt a sense of purpose, a direction that went beyond business, beyond ambition, toward family, toward redemption, toward a chance to rebuild the bond he had once broken. And in that moment, although the future was uncertain, both of them knew that the secret Grace carried would change everything, and that neither could ignore the depth of their intertwined fates.
The sun shone warmly over hill country, casting a golden hue over the small church hall where Grace's family had decided to host her baby shower. The air was filled with the scent of freshly baked pastries, colorful decorations, and the soft hum of excitement from friends and family. Grace had insisted on a modest celebration, wanting it to be intimate and joyful, despite the tension simmering beneath the surface of her life. She had carefully avoided inviting anyone from her professional world, hoping this day would be solely for her family and the child she carried. Yet, as she stood near the entrance, adjusting a small ribbon on her dress, she spotted two familiar figures arriving together, Richard and Ethan Montgomery. Her chest tightened at the sight, a mixture of dread and lingering emotions surging through her. Richard's expression was anxious but hopeful, while Ethan's eyes reflected a quiet determination and apprehension. Grace exhaled slowly, bracing herself for the encounter she had anticipated but never fully prepared for. Her mother, sensing her unease, stepped forward. "Grace, they're here to make amends," she said softly. "Don't let them unsettle you. This day is about you and the baby." Grace nodded, grateful for her mother's support, yet the knot in her stomach refused to loosen. She knew that the appearance of Richard and Ethan would inevitably bring unresolved tensions to the surface. Richard approached first, extending a hand with a nervous smile. "Grace, I know I don't deserve it, but I wanted to be here. I want to apologize for everything, the misunderstandings, the pressure I put on you, and for involving you in, well, everything that happened." Grace gave him a polite nod, keeping her emotions in check. "Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. I appreciate your concern, but today is about my family and the baby. I hope you understand." Richard's shoulders sagged slightly, but he nodded in understanding. "Of course, I just wanted to show support. That's all." Ethan stood beside him, his presence commanding yet restrained.
"Grace," he began, his voice low and sincere, "I came because I need to see you. I need to make amends, and I want to be part of this day, if you'll allow it. I know I don't deserve it, but I can't ignore the chance to show you I've changed." Grace's gaze hardened, though her chest fluttered involuntarily at the sight of him. "Ethan, this is a family gathering. Please remember that." He gave her a small nod, the faintest hint of a smile playing at his lips. "I understand. I'll respect your space." The shower began with laughter, games, and the clinking of teacups. Grace's younger brother opened presents with childlike excitement, while her mother fussed over the table settings, ensuring everything looked perfect. The room was filled with warmth, the kind of genuine affection that reminded Grace of why she had fought so hard for her family's well-being. Yet, despite the cheerful ambiance, the tension between her and Ethan remained palpable. After a few hours, as the celebration reached a lull, Grace took a deep breath and stood, commanding the attention of the guests. "Thank you, everyone, for coming today. Your support means more than words can express," she began, her voice steady. She paused, scanning the room, her eyes landing on Richard and Ethan. "Before we continue, there's something important that I need to share, something that everyone deserves to know." A hush fell over the room, curiosity and unease rippling through the guests. Ethan's heart clenched, sensing where this was headed, while Richard's expression shifted to worry. Grace took another breath, summoning every ounce of courage. "Many of you know that Ethan and I were married. What you may not know is that it was a contract marriage, an arrangement for 1 year after which we were supposed to part ways. We weren't in love, at least not at first, and the circumstances were complicated, but life has a way of surprising us." Gasps and murmurs swept through the hall. Friends exchanged shocked glances, whispering to one another, while family members struggled to process the revelation. The children of Grace's cousins looked confused, sensing the sudden tension. Richard's face turned pale, his hand instinctively going to his forehead. He felt the weight of shame pressing down on him. Not only had his insistence on the marriage led to this exposure, but he now realized how deeply he had underestimated the impact of his actions on Grace. Without a word, he turned and left the hall, his departure leaving a silence that seemed to magnify the tension.
Ethan's expression was a mixture of devastation and helplessness. He had hoped for reconciliation, for understanding, but Grace's public revelation had exposed their past in a way that left him vulnerable before everyone. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. The gravity of the moment weighed on him, each whispered comment from the guests cutting deeper than any rebuke could have. Grace's mother placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, a comforting gesture in the midst of the emotional storm. "Grace, are you sure about this?" she whispered. Grace nodded, her eyes meeting Ethan's. "I am. He needs to understand the consequences of our arrangement, and everyone else, they have a right to know the truth." Ethan finally found his voice, his tone subdued but filled with sincerity. "Grace, I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen publicly. I only wanted to make things right between us, quietly, privately." She shook her head slightly, a mixture of frustration and resolve in her eyes. "Ethan, making things right requires honesty. I can't pretend our past was anything other than it was, and hiding it would only continue the deception." The room remained tense, the air thick with unease. Guests whispered among themselves, some expressing sympathy for Grace, others stunned by the revelation. A few longtime family friends exchanged knowing looks, realizing that the facade of a happy union had never truly existed. Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Grace could hear. I never wanted anyone to suffer because of our marriage, Grace. I thought I was protecting you by ending it, but I see now I caused even more pain. Grace held up a hand, cutting him off gently. I know you didn't intend for this, Ethan, but intentions don't erase consequences. Today, I needed everyone to understand the truth, not just for me, but for the child I'm carrying. Ethan's eyes softened, a mixture of regret and determination shining through. I understand, Grace, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it right, for you, for the baby, I promise. Grace exhaled, feeling a measure of relief despite the chaos she had unleashed. She had taken control of the narrative, asserted her boundaries, and ensured that the truth was known. Yet, she recognized the fragility of the moment, the delicate balance between revelation and reconciliation. As the baby shower continued, the mood slowly shifted. Some guests approached Grace with words of support. Others gave Ethan cautious nods, acknowledging the complexity of their situation. The initial shock faded into a tense acceptance, the kind that comes when difficult truths are faced head-on. For Ethan, the day had been a humbling experience. He had witnessed the consequences of his past actions, felt the sting of public exposure, and confronted the depth of Grace's resolve. And yet, amid the devastation, he found a glimmer of hope, a chance to rebuild trust, to support Grace, and to step into a role he had never fully appreciated until now, that of a partner and a father. As the sun dipped lower in the hill country sky, casting a warm glow through the windows, Grace and Ethan found themselves standing near the edge of the hall, away from the bulk of the guests. She met his gaze, her expression guarded but softer than it had been all day. "This isn't easy for either of us," she said quietly, "but the truth needed to be told, for the baby, for our future, whatever that may be." Ethan nodded solemnly, his eyes full of emotion. "I understand, Grace, and I'll be here however you need me. I won't make promises I can't keep, but I swear I'll do right by you and our child." Grace allowed herself a small, cautious smile. "That's all I can ask for right now. We take it one step at a time." And in that moment, amid the remnants of shock and the whispers of the guests, a fragile bridge began to form between them, one built on honesty, responsibility, and the shared anticipation of a new life and perhaps the possibility of a future where trust could be rebuilt.
The late afternoon sun dipped behind the West Lake Hills skyline, casting long shadows across the streets. Grace's phone buzzed insistently in her hand as she sorted through documents for the new project at Montgomery Industries. She glanced at the screen and froze. It was a message from one of Ethan's closest friends, a man she trusted and had occasionally seen at company gatherings. "Grace, you need to get to Ethan's house right now. Cal Barnes and Derek Lowe have escaped from prison. They're coming for him." Her heart seized, and an icy dread filled her veins. Cal and Derek were notorious in their circles for being vindictive after being fired from Montgomery Industries months earlier. Though she had never met them personally, Ethan had recounted their aggressive behavior, and the thought of them targeting him triggered a surge of fear and protectiveness she hadn't expected. Without a second thought, she grabbed her coat and keys, her mind racing. "I have to get to him," she muttered to herself, her voice tight with anxiety. Her pulse quickened as she drove through the familiar roads of West Lake Hills, the rain beginning to drizzle lightly, turning the streets slick and reflective. Every shadow, every turn of a passing car heightened her panic. Thoughts of Ethan, alone and vulnerable, gnawed at her. She couldn't let anything happen to him. Not now, not ever. When she reached the sprawling Montgomery residence, the front lights were dim, and the house seemed eerily quiet. Grace's fingers trembled as she fumbled with the keys, finally managing to unlock the door.
The familiar interior, usually filled with warmth and the scent of fresh coffee or baked goods, felt cold and foreboding. Her mind raced with images of the supposed intruders lurking inside, waiting to harm Ethan. "Ethan!" she called, her voice echoing through the grand hallway. "Are you here? Are you okay?" The only reply was the creak of the floorboards under her own feet. She hurried toward the living room, her anxiety escalating. From the corner of her eye, she saw movement. A shadow seemed to flicker across the wall, and she flinched, nearly dropping her bag. "Ethan?" she called again, her voice trembling with urgency. When a figure stepped into the light, she gasped, relief flooding her initially, only to be replaced by disbelief and fury. It was Ethan, standing calmly in the center of the room, holding a mug of coffee. His expression was calm, almost bemused, as he watched her approach like a whirlwind. "Grace, wait," he began, but she cut him off. "Wait? Ethan, what is going on? Cal and Derek, they escaped. They're after you. Your friends said? I thought you were in danger." He set down the mug and took a cautious step toward her. "Grace, calm down. There's nothing happening. It was a prank, a test. My friends sent you here to see how you'd react, how much you care. I didn't know they'd go this far." Grace froze. Disbelief etched across her face. Her breathing was ragged and her knuckles whitened around her bag strap. "A prank?" she repeated, her voice rising. "You mean to tell me that I rushed here, terrified, thinking you were in mortal danger, for a joke?" He exhaled slowly, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "It wasn't supposed to be a joke like this, I swear, Grace. I didn't expect them to manipulate the situation so completely. I thought it would be a harmless way to let you see that I'm fine and that you care." Grace's chest heaved, a mixture of fury, betrayal, and lingering adrenaline surging through her. "You thought it was harmless. Ethan, do you realize what could have happened? What I could have done in panic? What if someone had actually broken in? Do you even understand how reckless this is?"
Ethan took a tentative step closer, his voice softening. "I know, Grace. I know it was reckless. I'm sorry. I never wanted to put you through fear like that. I want you to know somehow how much you mean to me. I thought this would, force a realization that you care, that we can't ignore what's between us." Her hands dropped to her sides, trembling from anger and residual fear. "You don't get to manipulate me, Ethan. Not again. I've already been through so much with you. Our contract, the betrayal, the fake marriage, and now you let your friends play with my fear? This isn't a lesson in love. It's cruel and irresponsible." Ethan's expression turned grave, his usual composure giving way to raw remorse. "Grace, I wasn't thinking clearly. I let my emotions get the better of me. I've been trying to make up for the mistakes I made in the past, to show you that I care, that I want to be part of your life. But I see now that I crossed a line." Grace shook her head, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Ethan, this isn't about your feelings. This is about respect, trust, and boundaries. You keep pushing me into situations that test me, that put me in emotional turmoil. How am I supposed to believe anything you say when your actions contradict it?" He stepped closer, his voice pleading now, gentle yet intense. "I understand, and I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust back. I swear, Grace, I'll never let something like this happen again. No tricks, no games. I need you to know that my feelings are real, that I care about you and the baby more than anything." Grace's jaw tightened, and she took a step back, her hands clenching. "Your feelings aren't enough, Ethan. They've never been enough to undo the hurt you've caused. You need to respect me, respect my decisions, and stop testing me."
He nodded solemnly, a shadow of guilt in his eyes. "You're right. I overstepped. I can't undo the fear I caused you, but I want you to know I'll spend every day proving that I've learned from this, that I can be the man you and our child deserve." Grace's chest heaved as she tried to steady her emotions. The adrenaline of fear was still coursing through her veins, but a small, cautious part of her acknowledged Ethan's sincerity. She couldn't deny the truth in his eyes, though the wounds of past betrayals were still raw. "Ethan," she said finally, her voice calmer but firm, "if you ever hope to have a place in my life, you have to start with honesty and respect. No more pranks, no more manipulations, no more tests. Our child and I deserve that much from you." He took her hands gently in his gaze unwavering. "I promise, Grace. No more games. Only honesty, only truth, only trying to make things right. You and our baby, you're everything to me." Grace looked into his eyes, searching for any trace of deceit, but found only sincerity. Though the fear and fury had yet to fully subside, she felt the faint stirrings of trust returning. It would take time, she knew, but perhaps this incident, painful and reckless as it was, could become a turning point. "I hope you mean it," she said quietly, releasing a slow breath, "because the next step depends on it." Ethan nodded, his jaw set, resolute. "I mean it, Grace. Every word."
The quiet of Westlake Hills that night was deceptive. A soft drizzle tapped against the windows, and the lights of Ethan's sprawling home reflected on the slick driveway. Grace had barely begun to calm herself from the earlier false alarm when an unfamiliar sound shattered the stillness, a faint, ominous creak near the back door. Her heart jumped into her throat. Something wasn't right. Inside, Ethan had been reviewing quarterly reports, unaware that the danger outside was real. The earlier prank replayed in his mind, and he initially dismissed the noise as a stray animal or the wind. But instinct, honed from years of navigating the cutthroat business world and surviving past threats, told him something more sinister was afoot. He set aside the papers, stood, and moved toward the noise, silently, like a predator ready for confrontation. The back door suddenly burst open, and two men, faces obscured by shadows and rain-soaked hoods, stormed inside. The intruders were unmistakably Cal Barnes and Derek Lowe, their eyes blazing with malice, fists clenched, and intentions clear. Ethan's pulse spiked, but he stayed calm, stepping protectively between the men and the interior of his home. "Ethan Montgomery," Cal sneered, his voice low and venomous. "Did you think you could get rid of us without consequences?" Derek laughed, a harsh, grating sound that sent chills down Ethan's spine. "Time to pay for what you did. You fired us, you humiliated us, now it's our turn." Grace, startled by a loud crash, grabbed a nearby lamp for protection and moved toward the source of the commotion. She froze in the doorway, her eyes widening as she saw Ethan grappling with the two men. Fear surged through her body like wildfire. "Ethan, get away from them!" she screamed, her voice cracking with panic. Ethan fought fiercely, blocking punches and dodging blows, but the intruders were ruthless, driven by vengeance. One of Derek's swings caught Ethan off guard, and a sharp pain tore through his side. He gritted his teeth and retaliated, his fists landing hard against Derek's jaw. Blood began to seep through his shirt, but he refused to fall. Every instinct screamed to protect Grace and himself, to survive this violent confrontation. Grace's fear morphed into a feral determination. She grabbed a heavy vase from a nearby table and swung it at Cal, connecting with his shoulder. He staggered, giving Ethan a brief advantage. "Grace, stay back!" Ethan shouted, though his voice was strained with pain. "I'm not staying back," she yelled, fury overtaking her fear. "You're not getting hurt, not tonight." She grabbed a kitchen knife, wielding it with trembling hands, ready to defend him if necessary. Her heart pounded, each beat matching the rapid rhythm of the chaos around her. Ethan managed to push Derek back toward the hallway, but Cal lunged at him with renewed aggression. The blade in Ethan's side tore deeper, and he staggered, pain radiating through his body. He could feel his vision blurring slightly, but his resolve never wavered. Every instinct told him that he couldn't fall,
Not here, not now. Grace was with him, and they had to survive together.
The intruders, recognizing that the element of surprise had been lost and that Ethan's determination was formidable, finally retreated. Cal shoved past Derek, disappearing into the night with shouts of threats echoing behind them. The back door slammed shut, and the house was left in tense silence, the storm outside a mirror of the chaos that had just unfolded within. Grace dropped the knife, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She ran to Ethan, her eyes wide with terror as she saw the blood seeping through his shirt. "Ethan, you're hurt," she cried, her voice thick with panic. She knelt beside him, pressing her hands against the wound, desperate to stop the bleeding. Ethan coughed weakly, his lips twitching into a faint, pained smile. "I'm fine, just a scratch," he muttered, though the color draining from his face told a different story. His breathing was ragged, and the sweat on his brow was mingled with rain and blood. "You call this just a scratch?" she shouted, her fear transforming into fury. "You could have died, and I would have lost you. Do you have any idea how terrified I was? How angry I am right now?" Her hands pressed harder against his wound, trembling but determined to keep him alive. Ethan reached up weakly, cupping her cheek with a shaky hand. "Grace, I know. His voice faltered as a wave of dizziness overtook him. He tried to smile reassuringly, but the pain was overwhelming. "I never wanted to scare you, or put you through this. I had to protect you." Grace's anger mixed with heartbreak. "Protect me? You reckless man! You could have died, and I would have lost you!" Her voice broke as she realized the depth of her fear and love for him. Tears streamed down her face as she pressed closer, willing his strength to hold. Ethan's eyes softened as he saw the anguish on her face, and he struggled to speak through the pain. I'm here because of you. Because I care. Because I can't lose you. Or our baby." His words were labored, each syllable a struggle against the encroaching weakness. Grace's hands tightened around his, her fury now directed outward toward the world at the injustice of the situation, and inward at the helplessness she felt. "You listen to me, Ethan Montgomery," she said fiercely, her voice shaking but commanding. "You're not dying here, not while I am breathing, not while I can stop this. Do you hear me?" Ethan managed a weak nod, his fingers brushing hers as he clung to her words for strength. I hear you. Grace," he whispered, his eyes closing briefly. The pain was intense, but the determination to survive, fueled by her presence and the life they had created together, kept him fighting, refusing to succumb to the darkness. Grace helped him to the couch, pressing towels against the stab wounds as best she could. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands and dialed emergency services, her voice urgent but precise. 911? Yes, my husband, he's been stabbed. We need an ambulance immediately. Westlake Hills, please hurry. As she relayed their location, Grace never let go of Ethan's hand, her mind racing with fear, determination, and love. Every passing second felt like an eternity, each heartbeat a reminder of how fragile life could be. Ethan, bleeding but alive, looked up at her with a faint, reassuring smile, despite the pain etched across his face.
"You're here," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I'm glad
You're here. I'll never leave you, Grace replied fiercely, her eyes glistening with tears. Not now, not ever. You listen to me, Ethan. We survived this, together. Outside, the rain continued to fall, a rhythmic drumbeat that mirrored the tension and urgency inside. The real danger had arrived, leaving them both shaken, bleeding, and desperate. But in the eye of the storm, their bond, their shared determination, and the life they were about to bring into the world became their strongest weapon against despair.
The rain had slowed to a drizzle by the time Grace realized the pain in her abdomen was intensifying. At first, she thought it was just the shock from the attack and the adrenaline still coursing through her veins, but then the sharp, rhythmic contractions confirmed her worst fear. Her labor had begun. She staggered toward Ethan, clutching her stomach, her face pale and drenched in sweat. "Ethan, it's happening. The baby," she gasped, her voice trembling. She reached for him, but his body slumped slightly on the couch, blood staining his shirt and bandages, his breathing shallow and uneven. Panic gripped her chest like a vice. No, you can't. Not now, Ethan." Ethan struggled to focus, pain radiating from the stab wounds in his side. His vision blurred, and a wave of dizziness threatened to pull him under. Yet in his weakened state, he reached out and grasped Grace's hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Grace, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere, I promise. We'll get through this." His voice was hoarse, each word a struggle, but it carried the weight of determination that had defined him all his life. I can't do this without you," Grace sobbed, shaking with fear and the intensity of her contractions. She leaned heavily against him, ignoring the sharp pain in his side, relying on the fragile strength he had left. "Ethan, we have to get to the hospital. Please, you have to drive." Ethan nodded with a grimace, pushing through the searing pain. I can. I can do this. I'll get us there," he whispered. He rose slowly, every movement deliberate, clutching her hand to steady her as they made their way to the car. Each step sent waves of agony through him, but fear for Grace and the baby propelled him forward, overriding his own suffering. Once in the car, Grace buckled herself in as best she could, sweat dripping down her temple. She groaned as another contraction hit, gripping the edge of the seat. "Ethan, hurry, I can't. It's coming fast." Her voice quivered with terror and urgency, and Ethan's jaw tightened as he gripped the steering wheel, blood staining his fingers from the wound in his side. The drive to the hospital was a tense blur. Ethan's vision swam, but he kept his focus on the road, navigating the slick streets with precision born of desperation. "Hold on, Grace. Just a little longer. We're almost there," he muttered through gritted teeth, trying to mask the pain in his voice. Grace clenched the seatbelt, her eyes filled with tears and fear, her breath short and ragged. I can't. It hurts. It's too much," she cried, her voice breaking with each contraction. Ethan's heart clenched, his own strength waning, but he refused to let them falter. "Yes, you can, Grace. You're strong, the strongest person I know. We're almost there. Just keep breathing. Keep holding on." Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the darkened streets as Ethan pushed the car faster, the engine roaring against the downpour. Grace's head lolled back against the seat, and she squeezed his hand with all her remaining strength. "Ethan, don't let me." She couldn't finish her sentence, pain cutting through her words.
By the time they reached the hospital entrance, Ethan's body was almost spent, his steps slow as he helped Grace out of the car. Nurses rushed toward them, taking in the sight of the bleeding, injured man and the laboring woman. "Get her on a stretcher. He needs immediate attention," one nurse called, her voice sharp but controlled. Grace clutched Ethan's hand as they moved, refusing to let go even as the pain racked her body. "Stay with me! Don't leave me!" she whispered, panic and love laced through every syllable. Ethan forced a weak smile, his energy nearly spent. Never, Grace. I'm right here. Always," he reassured her, his voice barely above a whisper, but enough to anchor her fear. Inside the emergency room, doctors quickly assessed the situation. Mother and father both critical, one surgeon muttered, coordinating a flurry of activity. Grace was immediately wheeled into a labor and delivery suite, while another team attended to Ethan, carefully moving him to a trauma room. Their eyes met briefly, full of unsaid words, a shared determination to survive, to protect one another and the life they had created. Grace screamed as another contraction hit, the pain overwhelming, but she clung to Ethan's image in her mind. I can't do this," she cried, voice breaking, tears streaming down her face. A nurse squeezed her shoulder firmly. "Yes, you can. You're doing amazing. Your baby is coming, and we're going to make sure you both are safe." Meanwhile, Ethan lay on a hospital bed, doctors working frantically to stabilize him. He gritted his teeth as pain lanced through his side, each heartbeat a battle against his weakening body. Through the haze of blood loss and fatigue, his mind was solely focused on Grace. "Come back to me, Grace. Come back to me," he whispered under his breath, each word a lifeline to himself and to the love he refused to lose. The labor continued, intense and relentless. Grace's screams echoed through the delivery suite as the medical team guided her through each contraction. Her hands gripped the side rails, her body drenched in sweat, but her determination never wavered. Every push, every breath was for her child and for Ethan, the man whose life hung by a thread nearby. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the first cries of a newborn pierced the air. Grace's tears flowed freely, her face radiant with relief and exhaustion. "It's a boy," the nurse announced, placing the tiny bundle in her arms. Grace's sobs of joy mingled with the tremors of relief, and she whispered softly to her son, "We made it, little one. We made it." Even as she marveled at the new life in her arms, her eyes were drawn to Ethan. He was pale and weak, bandages clinging to his side, but he opened his eyes slightly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. You did it," he whispered hoarsely, his voice barely audible. Grace leaned closer, tears glistening in her eyes. "No more contracts, Ethan," she said softly, her hand brushing against his. "No more games. This is forever. For him, for us, forever." Ethan's lips curved into a weak but genuine smile. "Only forever," he managed, his hand shaking slightly as it reached for hers. The two of them, battered and exhausted, held on to each other and their newborn son, a fragile yet unbreakable family forged in pain, love, and survival. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving a calm stillness over the city. Inside the hospital room, life and love had triumphed over chaos and danger. Ethan and Grace, scarred but resilient, had survived. Not just the attack, but the trials that had tested their bond. Their journey, marked with fear, mistakes, and heartbreak, had culminated in this quiet moment of triumph, as they clung to each other and the child who symbolized hope, redemption, and the promise of forever.
The morning sunlight streamed gently through the hospital room, casting a warm glow over the small, serene space. The storm from the previous night had passed, leaving behind a quiet stillness that seemed to reflect the calm after the chaos. Grace sat in the hospital chair, cradling her newborn son, his tiny fingers curling around hers. His soft, rhythmic breathing was a soothing reminder that they had survived, that life had been given a second chance. Ethan, lying in the hospital bed nearby, opened his eyes slowly, the weight of exhaustion and pain etched across his face. His side was bandaged, but the feverish pallor of the night's ordeal had begun to fade, replaced by a fragile strength. As his gaze fell on Grace, cradling their baby, a rush of emotion hit him. relief, love, and a deep, unshakable gratitude. He's beautiful, he whispered, his voice hoarse but tender, the first words he had managed since the emergency surgery. Grace looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and smiled faintly. "He is, just like you," she said softly, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. She leaned closer, offering him a small portion of the joy she felt, though the fatigue in her body weighed heavily on her. "You should rest, Ethan. You've been through so much." He shook his head slightly, wincing as pain shot through his side, but the determination in his eyes never wavered. "I've rested enough, Grace. I need to see him. I need to see you." His hand reached weakly toward hers, and Grace let him take it, their fingers intertwining with a gentle, intimate connection that conveyed more than words ever could. The baby stirred in Grace's arms, letting out a tiny yawn, and Ethan's face softened into a full smile. He leaned slightly closer, his eyes filled with awe and a newfound reverence. "We did this together. All of this. Because of us," he murmured, his voice filled with gratitude and emotion. Grace's fingers tightened around his hand, anchoring him, and she whispered, "Yes, because of us, Ethan. We survived everything. Together." For a long moment, they simply gazed at each other and their son. The room filled with a profound silence, broken only by the baby's soft breathing and the distant hum of hospital activity. In that quiet, Grace felt a sense of peace she hadn't known she could experience. The fear, the lies, the pain of their past seemed to dissolve in the presence of this fragile new life. Ethan's expression grew more serious, yet gentle, as he spoke. "Grace, I know I've made mistakes, more than I can count. I hurt you. I manipulated situations. I let my pride and foolishness put us through hell. But now I want to make it right. Not for a contract, not for appearances, but because I love you." Grace's eyes shimmered with tears, a soft smile forming on her lips. She leaned closer, resting her head against his shoulder. "Ethan, I know. And I love you too. But not the way we did before. This time it has to be different. No more games, no more contracts. Just us, together, and our son." Her voice was steady, but full of conviction. He nodded slowly, swallowing hard, emotion choking his words. "No more contracts," he repeated softly, almost as if committing it to memory. Grace's lips curved into a gentle smile, and she whispered back, "No more contracts."
Ethan's weak hand cupped her cheek, brushing away a stray tear. "Only forever," he said, his voice firm now, filled with promise and certainty. Grace leaned into him, her own tears spilling freely now, and nodded. "Only forever," she echoed. They spent the next hour in a comfortable silence, Ethan leaning closer to watch their son sleep, occasionally brushing a fingertip against his tiny hand. Grace adjusted herself in the chair, keeping the baby close, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. They had endured betrayal, fear, danger, and heartbreak. Yet here they were, alive, together, and beginning anew. Ethan's voice broke the silence, low and filled with emotion. "Do you realize, Grace, how close we came to losing everything? Not just me, but you and him." He gestured weakly to their sleeping child. Grace nodded, her hand smoothing the baby's soft hair. "I do. And that's why we can't take a single moment for granted. We have to hold on to each other, always."
He reached for the baby and with Grace's careful guidance, held their son in his arms for the first time. The infant let out a small coo, tiny eyes opening briefly, and Ethan's face lit with wonder. "He's perfect," he murmured, his voice cracking with awe. "I can't believe he's really here. He's ours." Grace leaned over, her hand resting on Ethan's arm as she watched the scene unfold. "He is ours, Ethan, and now it's up to us to give him everything. Love, stability, happiness, the kind we've both been searching for all along." Her gaze met his, soft and steady, conveying everything words could not. Ethan swallowed hard, holding the baby close, his eyes never leaving Grace's. "I promise, I will do everything I can to protect you both, every day, every moment. I won't ever let you feel fear or doubt again. I can't. Not after this." Grace's heart ached at the sincerity in his words. She reached out, touching his cheek gently. "And I promise, I will stand by you, not because I have to, not because of obligation, but because I want to. Because we're a family, Ethan, and a family stays together."
The nurse peeked in briefly, smiling at the scene. "You both look like you've been through a storm," she said softly, though her eyes held understanding. "But it seems you've come out stronger. Take your time, bond with your baby. You've earned it." Ethan glanced at Grace, his fingers still entwined with hers. "We survived the storm, and now it's just us. Just our family, forever." Grace rested her head against his chest, letting herself feel the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. "Forever," she echoed, finally allowing herself to believe it, to feel it deep in her soul. They sat together, holding their son, talking quietly in the soft morning light. Ethan recounted little memories from the night before, joking weakly about their reckless courage, while Grace laughed softly through her tears. They shared stories of the baby's first cries, the nurse's encouragement, and the moments that had felt unbearably tense, yet had strengthened their bond. Hours passed, yet time seemed suspended in that room. The world outside could wait. For now, there was only this: Ethan, Grace, and their son, wrapped in the warmth of survival and love. The hardships of the past, the betrayals, the fears, all melted away in the presence of the life they had fought so hard to protect. Finally, Ethan leaned back, exhausted but smiling, and whispered, "We have a second chance, Grace. Not a contract, not a promise we have to negotiate. Just us. Our family. Forever." Grace's fingers brushed the baby's cheek, then Ethan's hand, a tender, affirming gesture. "Forever," she said once more, her voice steady, full of conviction, and filled with the quiet triumph of love reclaimed and trust rebuilt. In that small hospital room, the past was behind them, the present a gift, and the future a vast open horizon. Together they had endured pain, fear, and uncertainty. Together they had survived, and together they would embrace every moment of the life that awaited them, bound not by contracts, but by choice, love, and an unbreakable promise, only forever.